So we say, number one, assume the following data for a country. Total population is equal to 500. Population under 16 of age or institutionalized of 120. Not in the labor force is 150. Unemployed is 23. Part-time workers for full-time jobs, looking for full-time jobs is 10. What is the size of the labor force? So let's take a look at this. Labor force is going to be the number of people who are both able to have a job and are actively have been looking for a job in the last 4 weeks. If we put the information here together, though, we know that those in the labor force added to those not in the labor force is equal to the total population. And here we have the total population in the total population of people not in the labor force. So we could actually just do 500, oops, one more time. Let's see if I can get this pen to work. Can't get the pen to work for some reason. Give me 1 second, guys. There we go. There we go. Okay, 500, oh my. Yeah, 500 minus 150, that's going to give us 350, right? That's going to be our total labor force. And what is the unemployment rate? We know it's the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force. That's going to be 23 divided by 350, and that's going to give us, let's see, 23 divided by 350 is going to give us 6.57%. We're going to multiply this by 100. Okay, and that's going to be how we calculate that. So next, take a look at the next question. If the CPI was 110 last year and is 121 this year, what is the year rate of yearly, I want to say yearly rate of inflation? In contrast, suppose that CPI last year and what was 110 and 108 this year, what is this year's rate of inflation? What term do you economics use to describe the second outcome? So we're going to use the CPI figures to calculate the rate of inflation. We know that inflation is going to be given by change in CPI divided by change in time. So if last year's CPI, or sorry, wait, change in CPI divided by CPI in year one, right? I think that is more likely. Yeah, so we're going to take a look at the first example, which is 121 minus 110. We have year 2 CPI minus year 1 CPI divided by year 1 CPI of 110. The rate of inflation then is going to be equal to 11 divided by 110, or 10%, right? For year 2, we had 108 minus 110 divided by 110. That's going to be equal to -2 divided by 110. So that would be negative 1.8%. And that is going to be referred to in economics as deflation, right? Price levels are actually going down based on these two CPIs. And so that's going to be our interaction for those questions. Let's take a look at this third question. Use the hypothetical economy data in the table below to answer the following questions. So we have amount demanded on the left, we have price level or price index in the middle, and we have amount of real GDP supplied in billions here. So we know these are both real GDP numbers, so it's separate from price. So let's take a look at A. What is the equilibrium price level and the equilibrium level of output in this hypothetical economy? Use Excel to graph both the aggregate demand and aggregate supply curves. Can there be equilibrium level of output at below full employment? So a lot of questions going on here. So I'm not going to bring out Excel to graph this, but we would see that if we were to graph both of these answer choices, both of these curves, we would see that they would intersect at one point, which is right here, where the amount of real GDP demanded is 300 billion. The amount of real GDP supplied is in 300 billion as well. So that is the equilibrium price level in output. So it would be equilibrium price, it would be 200 and 300 billion. Can there be equilibrium level of output at below full employment? So I think this is not sure where this question is going with that. Below full employment, employment is going to be not directly related to GDP. And so it's definitely possible to be at the equilibrium level of output below a full employment if we're not assuming a long run equilibrium. At long run equilibrium, we would assume full employment. So because we don't know the time frame, we're not going to know the answer to that. B says, at which price level will aggregate supply fall below or equal aggregate demand? So what I'm saying, it's talking about fall below. At price level 150, the aggregate supply is 200, which is less than aggregate supply of 420. So we're going to say, really any price less than 200. If price is less than 200, then that's going to fulfill that condition. And at what price level will demand fall below aggregate supply? So basically, if there's a surplus, and we see that at any level in which price is greater than 200, you would have a surplus. And at what, given the price level of 250, will aggregate demand exceed supply? And the answer is no, because you would have a surplus, not a deficit, and you would have a surplus, not a shortage, and you would have a surplus of like 140. And so that's not going to be right either. If the aggregate demand schedule shifted by $140 billion to the right at every level, what would the new equilibrium level of income be? It's basically saying that at every price level, you increase aggregate demand by another 140 billion. And so then we would find, so instead of 180 here, you would have 320, which is not equal 500. Here you have 400, which would equal 400. So the new equilibrium would be 250 price and then 400 billion in output. And that would be your answer there. So let's take a look at what the answer choice given by the previous tutor said. So we have total population is 500, population under 120 is 16 years of age, not in the labor force is 150, unemployed is 23, part-time is 10. It's the size of the labor force. They said 500 minus 120 minus 150 over 230 equals to 230. So I see here, what we did is I kind of assumed that total population meant total adult population, which is not the case and was a bad assumption. So this is indeed correct. we want to do 500 minus 120 as well, because the labor force plus those not in the labor force added together would equal the total adult population, but the adult population is actually 500 minus 120 and not 500. So that's my bad. 230 is right, so ignore what I did here. Unemployment rate would then be, instead of over 350, it would be over 230, so you would get 10% instead of 6.5, which is a much cleaner number as well. And so I think that basically covers the rest. And I don't think this tutor actually answered the other parts of the question. And so we're going to go ahead and fill that in, I guess. So we're going to have to do question 2. So in question 2, we have inflation is equal to CPI, or CPI year 2 minus CPI year 1. We have to divide that by CPI year 1. That means for this one, it would be 120. So 121 minus 110 divided by 110 is equal to 10%. And then 108 minus 110 divided by 110 is equal to negative 1.8%. And this is referred to as deflation because price levels are decreasing over time. And then that's going to answer all of the parts of question 2. And then question 3, we're going to talk about, part A. So 3A tells us equilibrium price and output can be found where aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. That occurs at price equals 200 and output equals 300 billion. So then we want to do part B. Part B says, at what price level will aggregate supply fall below aggregate demand, and which one will aggregate demand fall below aggregate supply? So price, aggregate demand, aggregate supply is going to be less than aggregate demand if price is less than 200. Aggregate supply is going to be greater than aggregate demand if price is greater than 200. If given a price level of 250, given a price level of 250, demand will not be greater than supply because price is greater than 200. And finally, answer choice C, rightward shift in demand by 140 billion means that that aggregate demand is 140 billion greater at every price level, i.e. add 140 to each number in the demand column. We can again find the equilibrium by setting aggregate demand equals aggregate supply after this shift. The new equilibrium is at price equals 250 and output equals 400 billion. And that will be our final answer. Let's take a look at this question one more time to make sure we answered all the parts. So we have question 1 is correct. Question 2 says inflation is given by this equation. That gives us these two figures. And this figure of a decreasing cost CPI over time is referred to as deflation. Question 3 says find the equilibrium. We can find that by saying where aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. That's at this point. Aggregate supply is less than aggregate demand if price is less than 200. Aggregate supply is greater than aggregate demand if price is greater than 200. Given the price level 250, demand will not be greater than supply because price is greater than 200. And finally, a rightward shift causes us to increase each demand figure by 140 on the left. And that's going to give us some new figures to find a new equilibrium, which is at 250 and 400 billion. So I'm going to mark the solution incorrect just because it was